before we dive in, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to know. And if you believe that talent has no zip code, no background, and no boundaries, hit that subscribe button. We're pushing hard to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your one click could be the one that gets us there. Now, let's get into this story, because this one will stay with you. The morning Marcus Vance walked into his own waiting room and pointed at a candidate, a grown man in a $3,000 suit, and said, You're already eliminated. Your handshake was weak. I don't hire weak. Nobody laughed. They wanted to. You could see it in the way shoulders trembled and eyes darted sideways. But nobody laughed because everyone in that waiting room understood one terrible truth. He meant it. Marcus Vance, CEO of Vance Industries, one of the most powerful agricultural supply corporations in the United States, did not do anything for show. He had built his company from a single warehouse into a billion-dollar empire by being exactly what people whisper about him behind closed doors: brutal, brilliant, and absolutely allergic to weakness. The man whose handshake had failed him gathered his briefcase with shaking hands and walked out before the door had even finished swinging. The remaining candidates straightened their spines, all except one. In the far corner of the waiting room, sitting with her back perfectly straight and her hands folded quietly in her lap, was a young woman who looked like she had taken a wrong turn somewhere and ended up here by accident. She was 18 years old. Her name was Zara Coleman. She wore a navy blue dress that her mother had ironed 3 times that morning, and her shoes, small black flats, had a tiny scuff on the left toe that she tried to cover with a mark of the night before. She had driven 4 hours to get here, not in a company car, not in a taxi charged to a corporate account. She had driven herself, in her father's old pickup truck, the one that smelled like soil and diesel and something that might have been hope. Zara was the daughter of Henry Coleman, a black farmer who worked 40 acres of cotton and soybean fields in a quiet, unnamed stretch of rural America, where the nearest traffic light was 20 minutes away. Henry Coleman had worked that land since before Zara could walk. He had worked it through droughts and floods, through market crashes and equipment failures, through years when a harvest came in beautiful and years when it broke his heart completely. And right now, that land was in trouble. A large agricultural supply company, ironically, one connected to Vance Industries, had been overcharging small independent farmers in their region for seeds and fertilizer, locking them into contracts with hidden fees buried in language that took a lawyer to decode. Henry Coleman couldn't afford a lawyer. What he could afford was his daughter, who had spent the last 2 years reading every contract, every invoice, every agricultural trade report she could find, determined to understand the system that kept swallowing her family whole. She hadn't applied for this job because she wanted a corner office. She had applied because Vance Industries was the one company with enough power to change the way those supply contracts were written, and she needed to be on the inside to make that happen. Was it a long shot? Yes. Did she care? She was a farmer's daughter. Long shots were just Tuesday. Back in the waiting room, the other candidates were now stealing glances at her. A man in a sharp gray suit leaned over slightly. "First time?" he asked, his voice carrying just enough condescension to be insulting without being obvious. "First time in this building," Zara said pleasantly. "Yes." He looked her over once, the dress, the shoes, the natural hair pinned neatly back, and smiled the kind of smile that isn't really a smile at all. "Cute," he said, and turned away. Zara looked down at her hands, at the small calluses on her palms from hauling irrigation pipes, at the faint shadow under her thumbnail that never quite came clean no matter how hard she scrubbed, the permanent signature of a girl who had grown up working real ground. She closed her hands quietly and waited. When they called her name, she stood up and walked toward the elevator, and she felt every eye in that room follow her, some pitying, some amused. None of them, not a single one, threatened. That was their first mistake. The conference room on the 40th floor was cold enough to feel intentional. Long glass table, 8 executives seated along the sides, and at the head Marcus Vance in a charcoal suit, watching the door the way a man watches something he's already decided isn't worth his time. Zara stepped inside. Marcus looked at her the way you look at something that doesn't quite fit the picture you had in your mind. His eyes moved, dress, shoes, age posture, and then slowly a smile crossed his face. Not a kind one. "How old are you?" he asked, before she had even sat down. 18, Zara said. Someone at the table coughed. Someone else shifted papers that didn't need shifting. Marcus tilted his head. 18, he repeated, as if tasting the word and finding it amusing. "And what exactly do you think you can offer a billion-dollar company that the 35-year-olds with MBAs sitting outside that door cannot?" The room went very still. Zara pulled out her chair, sat down with her back straight, and looked Marcus Vance directly in the eyes. "I can tell you," she said calmly, "that your company is currently bleeding approximately $4 million a year through a vendor contract structure that every single person in this room has been too comfortable to question." Nobody moved. Marcus Vance's smile didn't disappear, but something behind his eyes did. "Go on," he said softly, and the room held its breath. "And if nobody has told you today, your support means everything. We're on a mission to hit 1,000 subscribers, and we are so close. One tap. That's all it takes. Hit that subscribe button right now, and let's get there together." Now, back to Zara, because she just said something that stopped a billion-dollar boardroom cold. Let's find out what happens next. $4 million. The number sat in the middle of that glass conference room like something alive, like it had weight, like it had teeth. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. 8 of the most experienced executives in the country sat perfectly still, and the only sound was a faint hum of the air conditioning working too hard in a room that was already ice cold. Marcus Vance leaned forward slowly, the way a man leans forward when he's deciding whether he's impressed or furious and hasn't quite landed on one yet. "That's a very specific number," he said quietly, "for someone who's never worked a day in corporate America." Zara didn't blink. "I brought the math," she said simply. She reached into the folder she'd carried in, a plain manila folder, nothing impressive, the kind you buy in a pack of 25 at a dollar store, and she slid 3 pages across the glass table toward him. Marcus didn't touch them immediately. He looked at her first, measuring, calculating, doing what he did to everyone who sat in that chair, trying to find the crack, the flinch, the moment they remembered who he was and forgot who they were. Zara looked right back at him. He picked up the pages. The room stayed silent as his eyes moved across the numbers. Then something happened that the executives seated around that table had seen perhaps twice in their combined decades of working for this man. Marcus Vance's jaw tightened, because she was right. Zara had spent 3 weeks before this interview studying every publicly available financial document connected to Vance Industries. Annual reports, vendor disclosures, agricultural trade publications, supply chain data buried in footnotes that most people never read because most people assumed someone smarter had already read them. Nobody had. What she found was elegant in how quietly devastating it was. Vance Industries was sourcing the same category of agricultural input materials from 7 different vendors, each one charging slightly different rates, each contract renewed independently on a rolling basis with no cross-vendor negotiation. On paper, it looked like healthy diversification. In reality, it was a coordination failure that had been compounding for years, costing the company millions in what should have been consolidated bulk pricing. It was, Zara had thought when she first found it, exactly like what used to happen to the farmers' co-op back home before her father helped reorganize it. "Where did you get this?" one of the executives asked. A woman in a red blazer, her voice careful and controlled. "Your own public filings," Zara said. "Page 47 of your 2022 annual report. Cross-reference with the vendor rate disclosures your procurement team published in the trade journal last spring." She paused. "It's all public. Anyone could have found it." The woman in the red blazer looked down at her own stack of notes and said nothing. Marcus set the pages down. "Walk me through your solution," he said. And so Zara did. She spoke the way she'd learned to speak at her father's kitchen table, going over farm accounts late at night with a calculator and a cup of tea getting cold beside her. Plainly, precisely, without dressing it up or making it more complicated than it needed to be. Consolidate the 7 vendors into 3 strategic partnerships. Renegotiate on volume. Build in a cooperative pricing clause that rewards consistency on both sides. The result, conservative estimate, was a saving of just under $4 million annually, with room to grow as the partnerships matured. When she finished, Marcus sat back, For a long moment he simply looked at her. Then he turned to his executives. Questions. That was when the man in the gray suit walked in. His name was Derek Holloway, and he was supposed to be the front runner. Ivy League MBA. 5 years at a competing firm. The kind of resume that opened doors before you even knocked. He had been ushered in slightly late due to a scheduling overlap, and he settled into the remaining chair at the table with the easy confidence of a man who considered the outcome of this meeting a formality. He glanced at Zara, the same look from the waiting room, amused, dismissive. Then he looked at the pages still sitting on the table in front of Marcus. His eyes sharpened. I actually identified a similar inefficiency in my prep research, Derek said smoothly, directing his words at Marcus. Though my analysis goes considerably deeper. I'd be happy to present it, perhaps after we wrap up the current portion of the interview. He smiled, not at Marcus, at Zara. It was the kind of move that worked in rooms where nobody was paying close attention. But Zara had grown up watching her father negotiate with men twice his age who thought they could talk over him, around him, and through him. She recognized a move for exactly what it was. She didn't get angry. She didn't flinch. She simply turned to Derek with a polite, open expression and said, I'd love to see it. Genuinely, the more people looking at this problem, the better the solution. She paused just a breath too long. Can I ask which vendor contract you flagged specifically? Derek's smile held, but his eyes flickered, because he hadn't flagged any. He hadn't found anything. He had seen the pages on the table and made a calculated gamble that the room wouldn't call his bluff. Zara had called it, gently, in front of everyone, without raising her voice or pointing a single finger. The room felt the shift like a change in weather. Marcus Vance was quiet for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he asked Zara something nobody in the room anticipated. Your father's a farmer. Yes, sir. Has he ever lost a harvest? Zara was quiet for exactly 1 second. 3 times, she said. The first 2 almost broke him. The third one, he figured out how to use the loss to improve the soil for the next season. She met Marcus's eyes. He said the ground teaches you things that good years never will. Something shifted in Marcus Vance's face. Not softness exactly. Something more complicated than that. He closed the folder in front of him. Thank you, Zara, he said. We'll be in touch. She walked out of that room not knowing if she'd won or lost. Her heart was hammering so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. She pressed the elevator button and stared at her own reflection in the polished steel doors, a girl in a navy dress with a scuff on her left shoe, and she told herself what her father always told her after a hard day in field. You did the work. Now let the ground decide. Behind her, back in the conference room, Marcus Vance sat alone after his executives filed out. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he rarely called himself. His head of HR picked up on the second ring. Pull every candidate's file, Marcus said quietly, and find out everything we don't already know about Zara Coleman. He set the phone down and looked at the 3 pages she'd left on the table. Outside, 40 stories below, a girl from a farm was walking back to her father's pickup truck, not yet knowing that she had just changed the direction of her life forever. Are you someone who believes that real strength doesn't always wear an expensive suit? If that's you, then this channel was built for you. We tell stories about ordinary people who do extraordinary things. Stories that remind you who you are when the world tries to tell you who you're not. Subscribe right now. We are fighting to reach 1,000 subscribers, and every single person who clicks that button is saying, yes, these stories matter. Yes, real people deserve to be seen. 1 tap. That's it. You could be the subscriber that gets us there. Hit subscribe and let's finish this story together. Because this ending will wreck you in the best possible way. Zara drove home with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. 4 hours of silence. 4 hours of empty highway unrolling in front of her headlights while her mind ran back through every moment in that room. Every word she'd said. Every word she wished she'd said differently. The flat farmland stretched out on both sides of the road like something that had always been there and always would be, patient and vast and completely indifferent to the small storms inside one 18-year-old girl's chest. She pulled into the farm just after 9 at night. Her father was still outside. Henry Coleman didn't go inside until the work was done, and the work on a farm is never truly done. He was checking the irrigation lines by flashlight when her headlight swept across the yard. He looked up, read her face the way only a father can, and walked over slowly. He didn't ask how it went. He just put one large, callous hand on her shoulder and said, "Come eat something." That was Henry Coleman, a man who knew that some things needed food and sleep before they needed words. Zara ate. She slept, and in the morning she was back in the field before sunrise, because the land didn't care about interviews or boardrooms or girls with broken hearts. The seeds needed water. The equipment needed checking. Life on a farm moved forward whether you were ready or not. 3 days passed. On the fourth morning, Zara's phone rang at 7:43 a.m. She was elbow-deep in repairing an irrigation coupling that had cracked overnight. She almost didn't answer, but something made her stop, pull off her glove, look at the screen. It was a number she didn't recognize. A city area code. Zara Coleman. She answered, her voice steady even as her heart lurched sideways. The voice on the other end was not an assistant. It was not HR. It was not a coordinator calling to schedule a follow-up. It was Marcus Vance himself. "I don't make these calls often," he said without any preamble. "So I'll be direct. I've spent 3 days reviewing your analysis with my procurement team. You were right about every single number. We're already moving to restructure the vendor contracts." A pause. "I'd like you to lead that restructuring." Zara stood in the middle of the field, morning light breaking gold across the cotton rows behind her, and she was so quiet for so long that Marcus Vance actually said her name again. "I'm here," she said softly. I want to make sure I understand. You want me to lead it?" "You found what my entire executive team missed," he said. "Yes, I want you to lead it." She looked out across her father's field, at the 40 acres of hard soil and harder work that had shaped every single thing she knew about the world. She thought about the contracts, the hidden fees, the farmers who were being quietly crushed by a system designed to confuse them. "I'll do it," she said, "but I have one condition." Marcus was quiet for exactly 1 second. "Go ahead." Part of this restructuring has to include a review of how Vance Industries supplier contracts affect small independent farmers in rural communities. The pricing structures are damaging people who can't fight back. Her voice didn't shake. "I want that on the table. Non-negotiable." Another silence, longer this time. "You're negotiating with me," Marcus said. There was something in his voice that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite respect, but lived somewhere between them. "Yes, sir," Zara said simply. "Is that a problem?" Henry Coleman, who had walked over quietly during the call and was standing a few feet away pretending to check a fence post, heard his daughter say those words and had to look away for a moment. At the sky, at the horizon, anywhere that wasn't her face, because his eyes were doing something he wasn't prepared for. Marcus Vance said, "No, it's not a problem at all." The first month was the hardest thing Zara had ever done, and she had once helped her father deliver a calf in a thunderstorm at 2 a.m, so that was saying something. The executives didn't hide their skepticism. They were professionals about it. Nobody was cruel. Nobody was openly dismissive. But she could feel it in the room every single day. The slight pause before they acknowledged her suggestions. The way they'd look to someone else for confirmation after she spoke. The meeting she wasn't invited to until Marcus found out and made very clear that she was to be invited to all of them. Derek Holloway had been hired too, in a separate senior role. He was professional and polished, and every time he passed her desk his smile said, "I know exactly how this ends." Zara smiled back every time, and kept working. She spent her evenings calling farmers. Not just her father's neighbors, but communities across 4 states. Small producers, family operations, people who had been quietly absorbing unfair contract costs for years because they didn't know they had the right to push back. She gathered their data. She built a picture. And when she walked into the boardroom 6 weeks after starting, she presented not just a vendor restructuring plan, but a complete overhaul of Vance Industries' rural supplier engagement model. It would save the company money. It would also save hundreds of small farms from the edge they were teetering on. The room was silent when she finished. Then the woman in the red blazer, the one who had asked about the public filings during the interview, started clapping, slowly at first. Then the others joined. Marcus Vance didn't clap. He stood up instead, which in that room meant something more. "Approve it," he said to the board. "All of it." 3 months later, a regional news station ran a story about the changes rippling through agricultural supply contracts in rural communities. They interviewed several farmers who talked about finally understanding what they were signing, finally feeling like someone on the inside was paying attention. Henry Coleman watched the segment on the small television in the farmhouse kitchen. He watched his daughter appear on screen, composed, clear-eyed, speaking in that plain and honest way she'd always had, and he sat very still for a long time after it ended. Then he picked up his phone and called her. She answered on the first ring. "Dad!" "Baby girl," he said. His voice was thick with something that had no clean name. Pride and grief and love and time all mixed together. "I just watched you on the news." Zara was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, "What did you think?" Henry Coleman looked out his kitchen window at the 40 acres of land that had taken everything he had and given it back doubled in the only currency that ever really mattered. "I think," he said slowly, "that the ground knew what it was growing." Zara Coleman went back to the farm every weekend. She always would, not because she had to, because the soil had been her first teacher, and she never forgot the lessons it gave her. She learned that strength doesn't announce itself. It shows up early and stays late. She learned that the people the world overlooks are very often the people the world needs most. And she learned that when you know who you are, really know, down in your bones, no cold room and no sharp smile and no expensive suit can take that from you. She was 18 years old, a black farmer's daughter from a quiet stretch of unnamed American road, and she had walked into a billion-dollar boardroom with a manila folder and her father's wisdom, and she had changed things. Not because she was lucky, because she was ready. And that's the end of our story today. If this moved you, if Zara's story made you feel something real, please subscribe right now. We are so close to 1,000 subscribers, and every single one of you is part of what makes this community worth building. These are the stories that don't always make the headlines. The quiet ones, the powerful ones, the ones that remind you that you are more than enough, exactly as you are, exactly where you come from. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear it today, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We'll see you in the next story.